So a big welcome to everyone. The next in the series of webinars for Smart Society, and this webinar is going to be focusing on how you can become a low carbon SME, which is a really big topic at the moment. Low carbon is really important for local authorities. It's really important for businesses, and it's probably going to be the next big issue that we're going to be facing over the next couple of decades. And it's going to impact businesses. It's going to impact a lot of SMEs because the impact is going to be felt not just in the areas of the fact that we see it as an issue that will impact the planet, but it's going to be felt in the effects of things like how much things are going to cost, what sort of taxation is impacted, and things more specifically like the congestion zone charge and so forth, which are going to impact your everyday life as a business. So what we've done is we've come up with a webinar that's really going to focus in on the specifics around how you can actually benefit from being a low carbon SME and how you can actually use it as a way of leveraging your customers. So I think the first point is to talk and to give people an understanding of what actually the sort of impact that you have as a human, what sort of impact you have in terms of a specific. So we've come up with a question, and I want you to send me a direct message with any sorts of thoughts about it. How many tons of carbon does a diesel car generate based on 15,000 miles per year? So just send in some ideas. Okay, so somebody's come in with 15 tons. Any more on 15 tons? 30 tons, and then probably a few more points coming in there. So a diesel car on 15,000 miles will generate about 2 tons of CO2 per year. So that gives you an idea of the impact that you can have as a user in terms of the sorts of things that you do. And let's be realistic about where carbon is coming from. It is coming from when you actually burn some sort of fossil fuel. So what I wanted to do first is to just use the first couple of slides to just explain why the issue exists, so that you understand it, and then very quickly we're going to move on to that kind of practical piece around the principles of what benefit it's going to be, because you have to focus in on the benefit. You have to focus in on why you actually want to do that. Okay, so CO2 is emitted when you burn some fossil fuel, and that's cooking, heating, traveling, or any other kind of use around that. And basically, the excess CO2 acts a little bit like wearing a winter jacket on a summer's day. So imagine wearing that winter jacket. It holds the heat in, and then as a result of that, what it means is that the Earth's temperature increases. And those increases, they can be a bit deceptive when they get reported in the news, because when they get reported very much as 1 or 2 degree increase. And so you think about a 1 or 2 degree increase in respect of what the temperature is like in your house, and actually that's not particularly impactful. But the impact that it has in terms of the actual overall planet is huge. And so that is the impact about it is effectively probably similar to you going from a room that is 10 degrees up to a room that's 30 degrees, and you understand the impact of that. That is basically what's happening, and the increase in temperature causes a huge imbalance in terms of the ecosystem, and in terms of things like the melting of the polar ice caps. And so around 300 councils who are really starting to get smart about this have declared a climate emergency based on the concerns about this. And so what their climate emergency is highlighting, and what it's going to lead to, so it's going to lead to flooding. So there are absolutely parts of the UK that are getting more impacted by flooding as a result of global warming. it's going to lead to overheating. And I think that particularly this summer, that is something that people are seeing. It is clear that some of the temperatures that we're seeing in the UK are really outside of the norms, and it's likely that is coming from global warming. Food supply chain issues. I think that we've seen with the Ukraine crisis, we've seen the impact of what can happen with the food supply chain failure, and that is something that climate change is going to be impacted by, and air quality issues. And those of us that live in urban areas understand that air quality is a real key issue. So 2/3 of local authorities, councils have committed to being net zero by 2030. So that's not the whole area, that's just the council themselves, their buildings, their waste trucks, their fleet, all sorts of stuff like that. But the thing is that for a local authority, for the whole area to be net zero, the reality is that they need the support of the SMEs, the businesses that are in there, to be able to achieve that. And the government has set a target to get there by 2050, and it's the actions of the SMEs, the business owners like you, like me, that's what's going to happen. And I think that this is where we want to be thinking about it. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a clear view. I think that this is quite a nice picture that just shows about the idea of how that heat is captured in there by this kind of winter jacket of CO2 that is kind of surrounding the Earth, and it's absolutely something that we need to be thinking about. So I think that once you kind of get past the theory of it, I think that for it to resonate as a business owner, it's got to be about what is in it for me, and it's got to be about understanding how can I impact it without it taking over my life. It's got to be easy to implement, and it's got to be reasonable in terms of cost. But we need to also understand why actually going green. Okay, because the perception of going green is that it's probably going to cost more. Well, actually, it's probably going to cost more for you to not start looking at your sustainability. Okay, so certainly over the last 2 years, we have seen utility bills rise somewhere in the region of between 200% and 300%. Okay, and this is not going to stop. The rise in utility bills has been driven by a lot by the Ukraine crisis, but the reality is that as we move towards 2030 and these targets that local authorities have set, central government is going to start putting more and more taxation on energy that isn't coming from sustainable sources. And sustainable energy at the moment is in high demand. So there is a high demand, and the amount of supply is not increasing with the amount of demand. So that's going to result in prices going up. The other area is that taxes are coming in for more polluting forms of fuel usage. So think about the ultra low emission zone and how that went from how that spread out in London to the edge of the M25. The likelihood is that is going to grow even further. And what it's also going to mean is that there's going to be other zones put in place around other cities. So you are going to be, as a business, you are going to be incentivized to ensure that your delivery vehicles, your fleet, are going to be compliant with that, and that's about looking at different types of vehicles. It's about looking at either using battery technology or using cars that are more efficient and so forth. So this is a key area, and thinking about this is important because you need to be planning over the next couple of years for your utility bill costs and the taxation that is going to come around fossil fuels to increase significantly over the next 2 to 5 years. And that absolutely is something, it may not be put into the newspapers, but it is absolutely going to happen. And as we get closer to 2030, which is where almost all councils are targeting going net zero, there's going to be more and more pressure on central government to actually bring out those taxes, which are going to impact you and they're going to impact me. So it's a really important area to think about. The other thing is is that it can help your business win more business. And it depends a little bit on who your customer is. But let's look at a business that's supplying either a large corporate or supplying into some sort of government customer. The reality is that if you're supplying into a large customer, they are going to have requirements for you to demonstrate that you have things like a sustainability policy, things like that you have a plan to get to net zero, or alternatively, they're going to want to see evidence of how you are achieving net zero as we go over the next few years. It's really important to be able to do that. And I think that it's something that can absolutely help your business win more business. If you're supplying into a council, then again, there are stringent requirements for you to sign up to the sorts of principles around how you can do net zero, how you can make your business more sustainable. And they will also expect to see, so when you're actually tendering into local authority, one of the most recent changes that's happened is that 10% of all tenders, the scoring that's done around the tender, and when you supply a local authority, generally what you do is that you apply for a tender or a competition or a request for proposal, and 10% of the scoring of that is based on something called social value. And social value is all about being able to demonstrate lots and lots of areas about how you are helping society. Sustainability is an absolutely key area of that, and that will help you to win more business. If you're thinking about, if you're a consumer-facing business, then it's slightly different. But what it means is that you can be communicating to your customer that you are a sustainable and ethical business. And if you're a sustainable and ethical business, then consumers will trust that. Consumers want to know that they are dealing with businesses that take decisions in an ethical manner. And you can communicate that. You can tell them that you buy all of your electricity from sustainable sources. You can tell them that you are using efficient or carbon-free transport. You can tell them that you source products locally to reduce down the amount of carbon that comes out from the deliveries. And it's things like that that you can help to start build up. And not only does it help you to think through about how your business can be more efficient, but what it also does is it also gives a message that you are a sustainable and an ethical business. And that's going to be a really important area. And it's around 60% of consumers make decisions based on where they buy things in terms of the approach to sustainability. And I think that sustainable brands generally can charge more than brands that don't approach sustainability, that don't actually use sustainability. So I think that is something that is a really key thing to think about. It will also help you. It will help you in this principle of working with other businesses and so forth. So it's a really key area. Okay, and then finally, I think that what we've really realised is we've realised that staff feel proud to work for an ethical business, and staffing is a really key area at the moment. It's an area that we need to be hot on, because at the moment there are massive staff shortages across the whole of the UK, and so therefore making sure that your staff are happy, making sure that your staff are engaged is a really important part of any SME. I know for the teams that work for me, making sure that we are an ethical business is a really important part of that. 80% of people want to work for an ethical and sustainable company, and that is no surprise, because thinking about, do you want to work for a company that actually has morals and standards, or do you not? I think that's a fairly easy question to answer. Small changes will resonate with your staff, and it doesn't actually need to be much. But for example, taking the decision to put in place offsetting of CO2 for your business, and this is something that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the cost of it over the course of the next few years. That will really resonate with your staff, and it's those sorts of decisions that I think work well. We also, what you'll find around there is that more and more staff, particularly younger people, they are really keen to do this, and they will make decisions not just on what they get paid, but also on the approach that the business has. And I think that if you're looking to attract staff, you now need to be thinking about sustainability. It's a really important part of why people make decisions. So I think now we've talked about, let's look at some of the key areas and the impact of the different changes around the different parts of your business. Okay, so we've come up with a principle of what is the idea around this is to look at the environmental impact and how difficult or expensive these particular measures are in terms of what sort of the impact versus the complexity of actually putting it together. And so we're going to look at three areas. We're going to look at the business property, we're going to look at the fleet, and we're also going to look at what you can do at home, which also for a lot of business, a lot of micro SMEs, they are based at home. So it's another way of being able to get all of the benefits that we're talking about if you're a home worker. So what we've got in here is that the environmental impact, we want to be thinking about measures that are actually going to have an impact, okay? But what we want to make sure is also is that we're ticking off the things that are most easy, because they're the ones that we can do easily, cheaply, quickly, and so forth. So this is the kind of principle. I think what we've done in each of these is that we've talked about the principle of offsetting, and I'm going to go through this principle of offsetting about a little bit later on when we do the costing exercise to look at that. But basically, what offsetting is paying a company that has a series of other projects out there that could be planting trees or CO2 capture, which is basically taking CO2 out of the environment. And the amount of CO2 that it takes out is proportionate to the amount of CO2 that you as a business produce. And so therefore you offset the amount of CO2 that you produce with a project. And actually that is a really simple way of actually achieving net zero. There are some disadvantages around that, and we'll talk through that, but offsetting is one of the areas where it's probably one of the cheapest and quickest ways of being able to do that. And if you want to give a message to your staff that you're really serious about sustainability, then I think offsetting is one of the first things to be thinking about. When we're talking about starting to think about the kind of key areas, I think that there are probably three areas that we should be looking at first. So number one, a really easy and effective way of being able to move over to a more efficient, a more net zero approach to energy sourcing is basically to look at your energy bills and go for a sustainable electricity or sustainable gas, sustainable electricity contract. And this is where you have your utility bill, your utility provider will offer you options to be able to source all of your energy from a wind farm or from solar or some sort of renewable energy source like that. It's a really easy way to do it. There are some additional costs to doing that, but I think again it's a really nice message to your staff and to your customers, and also to potential customers, that you are really serious about sustainability. The next area that I think is a really easy and cheap way to introduce a much more efficient approach to energy usage is taking a look at your lighting. Okay, so lighting represents about 15% of your total utility bill, and by implementing some LED lighting, you can take out about 75% of the energy usage for that. And we'll talk through a little bit about the costs about that, but lighting is one of the easiest things that can be changed, particularly by just changing the bulbs. You may, for some of the business implementations, you may need to look at changing the actual fittings that are in there, but in a lot of cases, just a change for the bulbs can have a really big benefit. And then finally, I think the third area that is a really simple one is looking at ventilation. Looking at ventilation, because ventilation for businesses is a really key part of the electricity usage. Considering ventilation and looking at how you can get a more efficient air conditioning unit, that is something that can have a really big impact on that. So a more efficient air conditioning unit can have a reduction in electricity of around 20 to 30%. and air conditioning is a really expensive part of your electricity bill. So that's another nice one. The installation costs associated with that are not actually particularly high. Once you've done those three areas, then the next set of steps become a little bit more difficult, a little bit more expensive, and they've got different benefits, and so some of them will be relevant. But thinking about solar, we're going to talk about solar in a bit. Solar is a really interesting one because there's been massive increases in the electricity prices, and so therefore what that means is that can actually make solar more effective. Thinking about battery and electric car charging, so putting electric car chargers in your business so that your staff, if they're driving to work, are incentivized to charge their cars up at work. That's a really nice way to do that. And there are a lot of large businesses out there that are doing that. The actual relative cost of offering staff the opportunity to do that, I think, is a really interesting incentive. And then as we move out further, insulation and windows, the replacement of those, that can be very expensive, and it could be a challenging project, particularly if you're in a tenanted property. Heat source pumps as well. That heat source pump is a type of boiler that will effectively replace a gas boiler. It uses electricity, much more efficient. But in terms of the cost of heat source pump boilers, the cost of maintenance can be. Okay, so we've talked about your business, your business property. Let's have a look at what options exist to improve the delivery transport mix. So we've got offsetting as well. So that's a fairly simple one. The second one is thinking about biofuel, and many of you may not realise that actually, where you have a diesel vehicle, where you're buying diesel, there is a percentage of diesel that actually is biofuel. So if you're buying diesel, you are already utilizing a percentage of that in biofuel. So that's a really really easy way to consider doing that. Is a simple one, and it's something that you can communicate to your customer. I think the other really simple one is about driver training. So thinking about the cost of maintenance, and maintenance has a CO2 impact because you need CO2 to produce the new components, the new brake pads, but also the amount of fuel that you burn. Is that you can reduce the amount of fuel that you burn by about 15% with drivers actually driving sensibly and within the speed limit. So we all know the stereotype of the white van man who drives around at a horrific speed and corners hard. If you train your drivers to actually drive in a manner that they're going to be that's actually is a much easier drive in the car, it will reduce fuel, it will reduce usage on the car, and that's a really simple one. You don't actually have to do anything like that. Then as you start to look at other measures, so things like route optimization, this is probably only relevant for those businesses that have got quite a lot of fleet and quite a lot of delivery requirements. But it's a good way. You don't actually have to change your fleet at all. All it's doing is about thinking about how you can get from the point of pickup to the point of delivery in a more efficient manner. Thinking about the different types of cars also is an interesting one, but this is when you start to move into that kind of big capital expenditure. And there are some really interesting areas about this, in the sense that actually, if you look at the potential sustainability benefits and the CO2 reduction of an electric car versus a new diesel car, the reality is that there isn't actually much difference, because actually much of the CO2 that's released around a car happens when it's being built. So a battery car is built in pretty much the same way as a diesel car. There is also this giant battery that you need to consider about the disposal. So the reality is whether you go for a more efficient car, whether you go for an electric car, the kind of CO2 benefit is pretty much the same. There are some really interesting cost benefits with regards to electric cars, and actually, in general, an electric car probably is likely to be cheaper than over the life of the cost than a diesel car. If you're looking at large vehicles, then hydrogen is starting to become an interesting area. It's probably an area that is going to be only relevant to very, very large fleet operators, or alternatively, people that work in the waste industry. And that's where hydrogen can be of interest. So if you're starting to think about, thinking that hydrogen is a potentially a really exciting fuel, the reality is that hydrogen is very cheap. And B produces no CO2. So what happens is that when it burns, it just produces water. But the reality about it is that it's quite difficult to find hydrogen, because you need this sort of giant sort of filling station to be able to do that. And the number of vehicles that can actually use hydrogen is pretty limited. So as a general rule, I think if you're thinking about fleet, it's all about driver training, making sure that you're using efficient routes, and making sure that you're using either an efficient vehicle or some sort of battery vehicle. So let's think about sustainability in your home. And if we've got micro businesses out there, micro businesses, many people are working from home, and these are the sorts of things to be thinking about. So actually, it's very simple. And it's very similar to the office buildings in the sense that thinking about where you source your electricity from, thinking about your lighting, those sorts of things I think are really important. Smart thermostat controls are probably the other simple thing to do, to replace your thermostat with a smart thermostat like a Nest. So that will allow you to be able to control the amount of usage of heating that goes in there. It will allow you to be able to actually understand how much you're using. And actually, if you start to understand it, you will generally see a reduction in there. So the good smart thermostats have got really smart software that's telling you how you can use electricity and gas more efficiently to heat your house, and so therefore it will see your bills drop. And we've seen this massive increase in our utility bills. So actually having a smart thermostat can have, the cost of a smart thermostat is probably in the region of between £100 and £300, and the savings that you can do that by just not using gas and electricity, I think is well worthwhile. Also, thinking about draft proofing. So if you've got a draft in your house, so this is also the same with an office, or if you've got a shop, then draft proofing is a really important thing to consider, because the thing is that the cold air is coming in, and so what you're doing is you are paying to heat that cold air. Okay, so if you stop that cold air in there, you won't need to heat it. It's a really simple saving. It's a really simple thing to kind of put in there. And then as we look out, so you've got some of the solar PV. So solar PV stands for photovoltaic, which is basically just solar panels. Okay, so it's sticking solar panels on the top of your roof and creating energy for that. And then insulation, heat source pumps, and so forth. So these are the sort of key things around that. So I think it's really important now that we've kind of given you a view as to what you can do. So let's cost out some of the changes and see what it is that you can actually kind of implement. And the first one that I want to talk about is the cost of carbon offsetting. So we've talked about carbon offsetting. So this picture hopefully illustrates quite nicely that on the right-hand side, you've got the lady who's dressed in the high vis and the hard hat, works for a company that produces emissions, and then on the other side, she is offsetting her carbon with the guy with the white t-shirt, who has got a whole series of projects that could be wind farms, solar, forestry, and so as a result of that is effectively taking carbon in, and as a result of that, then there is an offset there. And it's very simple that you will effectively offset the CO2 that you put out there. So a micro business or micro SME will generate in the region of somewhere between 5 and 20 tons of CO2 per year. So we talked about the diesel car. The diesel car generates probably in the region of about it was about 2 to 3 tons. Then your business is generating in the region of about circa kind of 4 or 5 up to 20. So, for example, you're a takeaway where you're using a lot of gas to be able to heat all the ovens and the fryers. That's going to have an impact, and that's going to increase the cost of that. So the fact that you do that, so if you compare that to the average adult will generally they'll emit about 12 tons of carbon per year through travel, through heating, through lighting, and so forth. The cost of offsetting is somewhere in the region of between £1 and £4 per ton per month. Okay, so that gives you a sort of ballpark figure as to what you can expect to pay for offsetting. So it's quite reasonable to expect to get a cost of in the region of somewhere between £1 and say £2 per month per ton. So if you are a micro business that is emitting in the region of 5 tons, of 10 tons of carbon, then you're looking in the region of somewhere between 120 and £240 per year to offset your carbon. The way that you do that is that there's a whole series of different companies out there that can do this. You need to be quite careful that you're using a reputable carbon offsetting scheme, because there's all sorts of schemes out there. Some are more reputable than others, but some examples would be Ecology, Climate Partner, and Carbon Neutral Britain. They are 3 schemes that I think are really interesting. That they're well respected. They've got a lot of certifications, and so the money that you're paying genuinely is going into carbon offset. And so therefore, you know that when you're buying your carbon offset, that they are that it's actually genuinely going in there. So thinking about that, so as a micro business, there's a cost maybe in the region of something like somewhere between £100 and £300 to actually offset your carbon, which I think is, in terms of the scheme of things, thinking about being able to communicate that to your customers, thinking about being able to communicate that to your staff, I think is a really interesting proposition. I don't think that's particularly expensive to be able to do that. So that's a simple one. Let's look at changing over to LED lighting. And the change to LED lighting, as we talked about, is a really simple principle. You can look at just changing the bulbs, and the cost of changing bulbs is really simple. But if we assume that we're going to be actually changing the fittings, then we need to think about the sort of costs associated with that, because in general, changing the fittings in a business, you will not be able to do yourself. So you need to factor in not just the cost of the fitting, but also the cost of the person or the electrician that's going to do that. Lighting accounts for about 15% of your total electricity bill. Okay, so it's got quite a big impact, and using an energy efficient bulb will reduce your energy usage between 75 to 80% of the energy that's utilised. So the thing is, thinking about that, if your electricity bills are in the region of somewhere between £800 to £1,000 a month, and for certainly some large shops, they will absolutely be seeing that. Then the potential around this is that you're utilising an LED lighting system could bring you savings in the region of somewhere of around about £700 a year. So what that means is that the savings that build up will offset against the capital that you expend on installing that, and it will also mean that over the course of the time that you use that, and generally LED lighting will last in the region of 25 to 30 years. So it's a really interesting one, certainly for a business that's thinking long term, that actually the savings there will offset the money that you spend in around probably about 5 to 6 years, and they last for around 25 to 30. Okay, the install costs are a bit difficult to estimate, because it really depends on the sort of lighting that you've got in there. But I think for a shop, you should be assuming that the capital cost is going to be in the region of probably £1,000 to about £4,000 to replace the light fittings and the light bulbs and get it installed by a professional electrician. And that's a sort of, it is a sort of budget, but it's very much based on the number of lights that you've got, the type of lighting and so forth. But it just gives you an idea as to what the cost could be versus what the benefit could be. So we talked about solar previously, and I think solar is a really interesting area because solar has come up against a lot of criticism, partly because how it looks, and partly because when people first started installing solar on their houses, the reality is that the cost versus the benefit that they got meant that the likelihood of them being able to get any benefit from a solar panel in terms of cost benefit was negligible, and by the time that the solar panel ran out, then they still wouldn't have paid it off for the savings that they've made. Well, that has changed. Okay, so the look of solar panels hasn't necessarily changed, and they are a little bit Marmite. So either people absolutely hate them, or alternatively, there are people out there that really love them and think about them, and actually that they are really nice. That people look at them and just look at the kind of sustainability piece. So whichever you sit, whichever part of the fence that you sit on, I think that we should actually look at this more from the commercial. What's the benefit going to be for you? Well, so install costs have really dropped. So originally when solar first came out, it was probably in the region of 10 to 12,000 to get a solar panel installed, put on top of your house. That's probably dropped by about 40%. So it's probably somewhere in the region of about 5 to 6,000. Now, there did used to be a whole series of subsidies. Those subsidies now have pretty much finished, and so therefore, what you've got now is that you've got a cost in there that you would pay to put solar either onto your property or onto your business property. The main impact, the main benefit that's happened here is the massive increases that we've seen in electricity costs, and that is what has made solar suddenly a much more interesting option in terms of a cost benefit, because as the price of electricity goes up, then the price of the electricity that you generate, effectively means that if your electricity has gone up by kind of 300%, which is pretty much what's happened across the board, then what it means is that the electricity that you're generating means you are not using that electricity there, and so therefore what it means is that a solar panel installation, it used to be able to it used to take sort of 10 to 15 years. Now what's happening is that you're seeing savings in the region of probably sort of £400 to £500 a year. So therefore what's happening is that the amount of time that it takes to pay off your solar panels is reducing. And let's face it, electricity costs are not going to go down. Okay, they are going to continue to increase and increase and increase, and they're going to increase because we've got a very unstable world at the moment with challenges around the different types of energy sources that we have. We also have a government that needs to pay for net zero, and the reality is that the government's going to pay for net zero through taxation of fossil fuels, and so therefore by having solar panels, you effectively don't need to pay the increasing energy costs that you have in there. Okay, so there are things to be thinking about. So each of the providers will pay you a different amount of money, and the reason that you get paid is because what your solar panels are generating energy all the time. Okay, but they generally don't store energy. So what happens is that if you're not using that energy, it then effectively goes back. So it's almost like a sort of sluice gate that if you're not using the energy, the sluice gate opens up and the energy goes back into the grid, and you get paid for the energy that you generate. It depends. There are different prices that you're offered from different providers. So that's the reason to make sure that you use a reputable company. It's also the reason to just have a think about that. And if you're doing any mentoring with us, then our mentors can certainly help you with regards to that. Okay, so that's it, and it's also important to be thinking about planning the use of your energy. So if you're a fast food business, the reality is that it's quite difficult for you to be able to manage when you're going to be utilizing your energy, but actually thinking about when you can actually utilize. So if you're a printing company, then thinking about when you can run all of that printing, particularly overnight, that allows you to access lower cost electricity. And so that's another way of thinking about how you can do that. Okay, so finally, we're looking at the cost of electric versus petrol or diesel. And we've all now seen, so we've seen that there's a whole series of really interesting vehicles out there, electric vehicles. We've seen the electric scooters. So if you live in urban areas, you'll start to see that a lot of the delivery drivers now are using electric scooters. We've seen electric vehicles, and we're now starting to see more and more electric vans. So Amazon has brought out a whole host of these really, really impressive vans that are fully electric. So there are lots and lots of options for you to consider as a business in terms of the use of electric. So I think that it's really important to understand. So from a carbon perspective, so if you're looking at this purely from a wanting to give a sustainability message to your staff, to your customers, then actually the difference between a new diesel vehicle and an electric vehicle in terms of the CO2 output, and that's looking at the whole CO2 output in terms of CO2 output from manufacture and then from running it, the difference is actually not that much. Okay, now there is a difference in terms of the particulates. So if you're thinking about air quality, then absolutely electric is better than diesel. But from a CO2 perspective, then actually there's not a huge difference around it. Okay, but the thing to be considering is, let's look at this from a cost perspective. Let's look at this from the sort of cost principles of how this is going to impact you. And I think this is where electric is becoming really interesting, because petrol and diesel, we've suddenly seen, and so I have a diesel vehicle, and so I have seen recently the cost of filling up the car to be broadly has gone up by about 150%. Okay, and that's something that has been very apparent. It's been probably more visible to me than the changes in the utility costs, because obviously they take some time to filter through, whereas the changes at the pump happen pretty much immediately. Okay, so that is a really, really big change. And so in terms of the cost of filling up an electric vehicle, and when you fill up an electric vehicle, you effectively, it looks a little bit like a petrol pump in the picture here, and you plug it into your car and then you plug it into a charger, and there are electric chargers popping up all over the UK. So probably about 3 months ago, in my street, overnight, suddenly we've got all of these different electric charge points, and so you plug it in just like you might plug your electric appliance in, and you charge the car up from a lamppost or a car charger or so forth. The cost of filling up your electric vehicle is about 1/3 of the cost of filling up your car with petrol or diesel. Okay, and that's a really, really big difference. And so if you're doing a lot of mileage, then suddenly electric starts to be really interesting around that. The other thing that's interesting is that the maintenance costs associated with electric vehicles are significantly less than the maintenance costs associated with petrol or diesel. Okay, it's a much cleaner vehicle. There is reduced usage on things like the drive shaft, reduced usage on the brakes, and that may be a kind of gobbledygook to you, but in effect, think about it is that the electric car puts less stress onto the vehicle than petrol or diesel, where you're actually igniting all of this. So therefore, that's the reason why it costs less, and that's the thing to be considering. Okay, so there is a difference in terms of that, and at the moment, electric vehicles, if you're buying an electric vehicle, they cost about an additional 1/3, an additional 15% on top of petrol or diesel. So there is a cost impact. And whilst there used to be some subsidies associated with electric vehicles, those have now finished. Now, what you can do as a company, which is interesting, is that there are some schemes out there that you can run where you can effectively offer schemes to your employees where they can do salary offset with their with an electric vehicle, and that can actually have some really nice benefits in terms of the in terms of the kind of principles. So it's a really interesting employee benefit, something that you can use and something to be considering around that. So they're just some opportunities to be able to be thinking about. It's a way of hopefully giving you a view that actually the change over to a more sustainable and more eco-friendly approach for different parts of your business, yes, there are costs associated with it, but it gives you a view of the savings that you can benefit from it, and it's also about how you can kind of focus on that. So let's get to the point. What are the next steps? So the next steps that you think is the first thing is to actually understand your carbon footprint. Okay, so if you're working from home, then actually your carbon footprint, you've got a pretty good view that it's the number of adults in your household times by 12 tons. That's what an adult uses. Look at your easy to implement measures. Okay, so reduction of what you use. We talked a bit about smart thermostats, thinking about how you can reduce the utility usage. That's a really simple way of reducing your utilities. Driving more carefully. Okay, it might not necessarily be the most exciting thing. So certainly any boy racers out there or girl racers, they probably won't be that receptive to that. But think about the fact that you can reduce your fuel usage by about 15%. And then simple measures such as offsetting or LED lighting can have a really big impact in terms of the offsetting of your carbon. It can be a great message to your staff, great message to your customers, and actually the return on investment on stuff like LED lighting can be really impressive. Then tell your customers about what you're doing to make your business more carbon neutral. Okay, it will make them love you more, and so there it is absolutely the case that you can the carbon businesses that are involved that take sustainability seriously, they can charge more than businesses that don't. So it's a chance for you to take every opportunity to tell your customers that you are sustainable, that you take sustainability seriously, and they will love you more for that. So if you want any more information on sustainability, we're going to put this webinar up on the on YouTube, so you'll be able to see it again. Or if you didn't get all of it, we'll send the link out to all of the businesses that we're working with. If you want any more information about this or about mentoring, and particularly mentoring around this sort of thing, then drop us an email, hello@smartersociety.org, and then we'll link you up with a mentor who can take a look at this. What we'll do is we'll finish the recording now, and then if anyone wants to ask any questions, then that's fine. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for listening to this webinar, and thank you for listening if you're watching it on playback, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a webinar sometime soon. Thank you.